Now, please give us an overview of the tariff policies announced on April 2nd. What is the larger political context in which Trump decided to impose such massive tariffs on the world?
Well, I think President Trump's Liberation Day probably marks the end of the WTO system. In that system, long supported by the US, tariffs were seen as market inefficient and universally harmful. But for over 40 years, Trump has consistently stated that he does not believe in free trade, or at least that the trading system was not actually free. And in more recent years, many Americans have come to believe that China broke the WTO system with its unfair trading practices. Recall that in Trump's first term, the administration did not appoint the members to the WTO's appellate body, which damaged its ability to function. As for the use of tariffs, the fact that Biden kept Trump's first term China tariffs indicated that a broader rethink in US trade policy had occurred. Even among those who believe in free trade, too. Many have come to admit that for national security reasons, admitting China to the WTO was a mistake, or that the WTO system contributed to American deindustrialization. COVID made this even more clear as the reliability of supply chains, particularly China's role in them, came under question. That development in particular gave tariffs a new legitimacy since the WTO system was no longer operating as designed. However, what actually happened on Liberation Day goes far beyond what Trump did in his first term. Imposing actual reciprocal tariffs, quote unquote, in the abstract, may have made sense to some Americans who think that the US should have the same trade barriers as its partners to encourage fair trade rather than free trade. However, these new tariffs on the entire world not only broke with free trade principles, it also broke with the common idea of tariffs as sector-specific tools to protect or promote certain domestic industries. Instead, each nation got an overall tariff that's not linked to any sector, and rather than using tariffs to adjust the overall trade balance on specific goods, these tariffs are meant to redirect trade. So therefore, it cannot be said that these are actually reciprocal tariffs. That's an important point. Rather, I think the tariffs could be the first step in a strategic recalibration, fusing geopolitics and economics. The Trump administration thinks heightened US-China competition stretching from maritime security to advanced technology and beyond, and with it the return of multipolarity in the international system, does not comport with a global security and economic system designed for the unipolar moment. I think Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick made an interesting point when he tried to explain the administration's thinking. He said that during the Cold War, the U.S. allowed its allies to have preferential trade relationships with relatively lower trade barriers in the U.S. than they had on U.S. goods in order to help rebuild their economies and be bulwarks against the Soviet Union. But at the end of the Cold War, the U.S. attempted to extend this system across the entire world. Lutnick thinks that China's mercantilist practices necessitate a total realignment of the global system where U.S. policy puts America first. In this context, the American economy and manufacturers and workers. So this highlights how trade policy and geopolitical strategy have been linked in the past, even if in recent decades many have forgotten this. China's manufacturing prowess and export strategy has made people remember the link between geopolitics and economics, especially in the Trump administration. In the 1990s and 2000s, the belief was that China's economic openness would lead to political liberalization, but it is now accepted that this thinking was based on flawed assumptions. Rather, it has become conventional wisdom that China exploited loopholes in the global trading system to wield geoeconomic influence in a way directly counter to U.S. interests. And China went from its fundamental strength in manufacturing to challenging the U.S. lead in advanced technology. So it seems the U.S. response is going to do more than just try to win the tech race. The U.S. under Trump is now going to attempt to disrupt the source of Chinese economic power, namely its manufacturing base and export strategy. As Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent frequently says, economic security is national security. So if that's the case, in my view, the tariffs hint at an attempt to create a new system where U.S. supply chains are brought back to the Western Hemisphere and domestic manufacturing becomes the basis for a renewed defense industrial base. U.S. allies and partners will be asked to pick a side, I think, to continue to receive the benefits of the U.S. security umbrella and access to its market and use of the dollar for international transactions, or to align with China. Trump calls this the economic revolution. All trade partners are understandably shocked. These tariffs were imposed under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, which Trump used earlier to tariff China, Canada, and Mexico back in February. This authority gives the president wide latitude as long as he declares a national emergency. However, whether persistent U.S. trade deficits qualifies as a real emergency is debatable at best. And it's hard to see how this emergency justifies tariffing countries that have free trade agreements with the United States, like South Korea. It only makes sense when it's viewed from a wider lens, a more holistic view, namely that this national emergency stems from the role of trade in the overall competition with China. And from this perspective, the tariffs on allies and partners amount to an attempt to restructure the global trading system in line with these new geopolitical realities, or at least that's what the Trump administration is thinking. A bigger problem, though, is the haphazard way these new tariff rates were calculated. It's almost unbelievable that the administration chose to do it this way. Still, as bad as it seems, I actually don't think this is the worst case scenario. Remember, Trump promised a universal 20% tariff during the campaign. And whereas the universal baseline that he announced last week turned out to be 10%. And the talk of reciprocal tariffs, actual reciprocal tariffs, led to speculation that the Trump administration might actually attempt to undertake millions of calculations to account for the tariffs on each sector and in each country around the world. Also, the effect of unquantifiable non-tariff barriers would somehow have to be calculated for each sector in each country. I mean, just on the face of it, not only would this be practically unworkable, I think it actually would have generated more uncertainty into the market. In other words, although the tariff rate calculation cannot be called a reciprocal tariff because it's not, the single rate per country is arguably more clear and its effects more predictable than true reciprocal tariffs would be. And that's probably the best thing that you could say about it.
Mm-hmm.
関税がもしアメリカがですねワークしていると世論が受け取ってしまうと我々としてはやはりその見栄養のもというかやはりグローバルな自由貿易良かったなということになりかねないというかですね